Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Please come in and take a seat when you're ready. My name is Clint Marchese, and I am a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and I'm the student panel lead for Sports Science Performance Analytics. It's my honor and pleasure to be able to introduce our distinguished guest this afternoon. To my left, we have Adir Schiffman, Executive Chairman of Catapult, proud sponsor of the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, and also a recent award winner of the world's 12th most innovative company as awarded by Fast Company. Very prestigious honor. We're also joined by John Brankus, creator and host of ESPN Sports Science. To his left, we have Dr. Leslie Saxon, professor of clinical medicine at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine. And on the far left, we have Joe Rogowski, head strength and conditioning coach of the Houston Rockets. Our panel will be moderated, to my left, by Tom Haberstraw, ESPN NBA analyst. This panel will run for 45 minutes, and we will leave 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please use your sports conference app to submit questions and also to vote on existing questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Tom Haberstraw.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Sports Science panel. I just wanted to do a little thing interactive real quick to start things off. Don't be shy. Raise your hand. We're gonna do like a little live infographic here. Raise your hand if you are wearing a Fitbit or Jawbone or anything else that gives you, raise your hand. Not counting iPhones. All right, so, okay. Wearable technology. Now keep them up if you've had it for more than a year. This time last year you had it. Seen a lot of hands drop. Stuff is getting big. Wearable technology is getting, thank you, that was very good. This stuff is becoming huge. It's one of the most growing areas of sport is wearable technology, biometrics. People are really into this stuff. You guys are into this stuff, and the athletes are really into this stuff. But there's a lot of roadblocks going forward. The NBA, for example, doesn't allow in-game trackers yet. But SportView cameras are tracking every movement on the court, and this is just the beginning. So we're really excited to have this panel. I wanted to bring up Shane Battier's comments in ESPN The Magazine. Pablo Torre and I wrote an article about biometrics invading the NBA, and one of the things he said was, it's scary. Big data is scary. And if he was an athlete, he'd be very afraid about it, and he's glad he's done. I want to ask this panel, starting with you, Adir, why is he wrong? Why shouldn't he not be scared?
Well, that's a fantastic first question to ask me. Why is a big-name speaker wrong in a public forum? Let's say we should all be scared about various things, but he probably is scared about big data in sport because he misunderstands what we are talking about when we talk about big data. So if we would phrase that question differently to him, and if he would say, how would you feel about a technology that enabled you to understand when you were at risk of injury and ensure that you minimised your risk of soft tissue injuries, to understand when you were at your peak performance and make sure that you peak on game day instead of in the middle of the week. It could improve the likelihood that you're going to make, regardless of sport, shots or touchdowns or whatever it is. And we gave you all of that information to extend your playing career. How do you feel about big data in that situation? I suspect you might have a different answer to the question. And that is really what big data is all about in pro sport and elite sport today.
Yeah. I think that people are frightened by big data and all this data gathering, but there really is no reason to be frightened about it because I believe we're in an age of digital natural selection where there are just way too many species of data that are out there and they're going to fall off and the strong data, the right data, the stuff that matters is going to end up surviving. And that's the age that we're currently in. We're in the business of making sure that we're communicating the data and putting a context to it that has meaning to an audience. And that's being able to put a context to it is what data, that's the goal of the data. The number is just a number for number's sake. But misinterpreting that number and using it to make too many decisions based off of that, I love to say that people want to take a number and they think when they look at a graph that bigger, stronger, faster is better, but that's completely not true. When you look at the greatest athletes of all time, Jerry Rice doesn't even rank in the top, 300 fastest wide receivers of all time. So if you look at that guy and you say, where does he fall on my graph with speed He's nowhere near the top. He's down in this range. When you look at top 5 running backs of all time in the NFL, none of them are taller than 6 feet. The average weight's like 205 pounds. When you look at these guys and you say, well, I'm not looking for the biggest, strongest, fastest. I'm looking for the Goldilocks zone of big enough, fast enough, strong enough. Data becomes a lot less intimidating in that fashion.
Leslie, you do something that kind of scares me. I'm big into numbers, and this stuff even scares me. I love data, but implantables, what does that mean, and how soon are athletes going to have implantables on their body, or in their body?
Yes, I think it gets to the Shane comment, and I respect him a lot. I think it really should raise eyebrows if one of the smartest players in basketball who big data, he looked at big data and then he learned how to defend Kobe and Carmelo, and he was the most successful player in the league, really intelligent guy, saying he's afraid when he embraced it. To me, that just reflects a lack of trust and is a legitimate concern on the part of the athlete that if they give the team, the league, the everything, how are their interests going to be protected? So if I were a league or a team, and as I've talked to those entities and to players, I would say, you want to collect biometric data, you want to have the everything, you want to have hydration, game performance, practice, fitness, off-season. You kind of need an implantable for a form factor, but nonetheless, you have to have the players at the table and enfranchise them. And I think he speaks to that fear that somehow that data is going to be used against him. And I would use that comment from a guy who loves data to kind of shape policy. I like implantables because they're getting to the point, I'm a cardiologist who puts implantables in, but where you can really monitor everything and it's seamless. A player and a busy strength and conditioning coach doesn't have to spend a lot of time. These people are already busy. They already have a lot of work to do. And then, you get the data, you get the analytics, and it's, first of all, you get where you want to go quicker because you're collecting everything. You have more data. You're more accurate. Secondly, you can use it to benefit the player. The player benefits. The player's injured less. The advertising revenue goes up. They're playing more. I thought about it, and I'll shut up, but I thought about it in the context of this issue whether the NBA should play 82 games or 60 games. And we have the data. We have the ability to say, hey, do players get injured more when they play? Let's collect it. Let's just see who wins. If they do get injured more and it makes more sense for them to play less, then people can see the marquee players win the revenue. So I think if it's in the best interest of the player, everybody's going to win. And if I were getting into this as a team or a league, I think a lot about enfranchising them early and building that trust.
What is your interactions, Leslie, with athletes when you bring these accelerometers and heart rate monitors? Yeah. What do they say?
Yeah, so they're great, and they're really excited. Initially, they'll do anything they would say to me, open up my heart now, can we do it in the bathroom? Because I want that implantable, if they think it's going to make them more competitive. And the problem is that right now we're kind of in the learning phase, so you have to collect the data, then analyze it to figure out how to do it, so they lose attention quickly. One of the things we've been able to do is create competitions within the group or the team. If it's the combine and it's running back, let's look at this 10-yard split time, the first two, keep your mechanical force equal and compete with each other. That will get them going and have them adhere to it. But they do want to see a deliverable, and they want that trust that, it's not going to hurt them. You talk to a league or a trainer, and they say, okay, just tell me how to leave the dogs on the table, because that costs me a lot of money, Yeah. So it's not like that's lost on them, right?
So you've worked with athletes all the time about this stuff.
As someone that's in the trenches every day with these guys, I see how they're pulled every which way every day, and they really have to have a trust in their medical staff, their strength coach, and so forth. And that trust is crucial to getting any of this moving forward. I think once you build that with the players and let them know that you're coming not only from like a basketball standpoint, that you're not just, when I work with my guys, I always let them know, listen, this isn't just for the team, for us. This is for you 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And I think they really appreciate that you care for them as a person, and that makes a big difference in trying to get them to buy into some of the stuff that can benefit them down the line. It's one thing to, I always tell my assistants and the other guys from other teams, I always tell, you get 10 things a year that you can ask these players, because you only have 2 hours a day. Sometimes you don't even have that. So in a season, you get 10 favors to ask these guys. So you better make sure they're good. And if you pick a favor that you ask these guys, and they'll do it for you, but sometimes after 10, they shut out and they're done with you. If you pick something out that they can't justify, or they can't see an immediate return, or they don't understand it and you didn't explain it well, then they're off, and then they're off all of it, and they just throw it all in. So you got to be very careful on how you present this to the players and how you educate them on it, because it could be very successful or it could be right down the toilet.
One of the things I'd add to that is, this is kind of quite a hypothetical discussion in some ways about the way players would react to big data. Around the world today, there are 500 teams that are using the kind of stuff that we do in their practice. A lot of them are using it in games around the world in different leagues. And this big data is being fed in real time to the sidelines in-game, and interchange decisions are being made in real time based on how worn out players are or their risk of injury, etc. And once players start to realise that this big data, especially if it's used in-game and in real time, helps lift their performance, helps reduce their injuries and makes them bigger superstars, they all love big data at that point in time.
Right, so there's this weird dichotomy. Like earlier in the panel for basketball analytics, Mike D'Antoni said this area, biometrics, is one of the probably most important area or growing area in sports. And yet you have this super intelligent athlete, Shane Battier, saying like, stay away. And how do you sell an athlete? How do you get them engaged on this is right for you? Because I was talking to Michelle Roberts at All-Star Weekend, and she said, this stuff, we're not totally trustworthy yet. We don't know if we want to do this. How do you sell players that this is okay?
I mean, what's interesting is, so we started sports science. We're literally in season 8. We've done 1,000 segments. We've had hundreds of the world's greatest athletes come through the lab. Everybody, I mean, when I say athletes love sports science, they love it. We never pay anybody to
They're
show
secret
up.
nerds,
They
yeah.
stay, yeah, they did. What they want to know is they want to look under the hood. They want to know how's my engine working? Like, how great am I? How do I push myself? They want to know that. But they're not obsessed, where they're not, most elite athletes are not like, oh my God, I'm looking at all my metrics and I understand it and I put it in a context. I think athletes are very fluid machines where it's the whole picture to them and they're not obsessed with one metric. And I myself just did as an athlete myself, obviously I'm not an elite athlete at all, but I do endurance stuff. I've done a bunch of Ironman triathlons. I did the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. And when you do go out through your training and you're looking at your metrics, and then when it's time to do an event, I did the Leadville 100 mountain bike race is a great example where I said, I don't want to know anything. I don't want any metric. I don't want a speedometer. I don't want to know how far I've gone. I don't want to know anything. Because if I know it, knowing my mind, I'm going to obsess about it. So if I don't know about it, I'm going to push myself as hard as I feel. But during training, you can find out and kind of check into it, and you're really curious. But during an event, I feel like players are, these great fluid machines, and what we're looking at is, and pick your analogy, but pick a song. You're looking at your symphony or an orchestra. You're seeing and witnessing and feeling all those parts. But if somebody obsesses about the percussion section, and now that's more important, it becomes a different song. It doesn't sound the same. It doesn't feel the same. So I feel like there's a time and a place for all the metrics.
And I think one of the difficult things is many of these players are such phenomenal athletes, and they got to this point without all this extra stuff. So sometimes it's hard to sell a guy that is an all-star MVP, and has done it without any of this. So that's where it becomes a little more difficult, in educating the guys and teaching them, hey, this could actually take you to another level. But it's difficult when the other players see, hey, this guy got to this point not having done any of this. So I think that's a tough part that you fight every day is, these guys are such freak athletes that they've gotten to this point on their own. So it's hard to convince them to do something different.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they feel, look, these players have been spoken to and coached, very paternalistic system. These solutions, the solutions we've had the best results in athletes, you really incorporate them. Digital and information is about democratization. Yeah. So they're involved. Look, I don't need to tell you that your guy went out and drank too much and is dehydrated, and that's why his mechanics look off on whatever sensor you're looking at. I need to show him on an app, scale 1 to 5, so he says in his mind or her, oh my God, I'm a 3, and I know why. Yeah. And that's private to me. And now, to me, it's the light bulb going off in the athlete's head as much as in the rest of the people around them. And if they're enfranchised by that, then I think they're motivated. They find their zone. It's simple. The app, whatever it is simple. It's a scale. It's a color. But they know what they did. And then maybe they can put it together. It's more organic versus You know, I'm going to, and even now I see it happening when I'm talking to teams who are implementing some of this stuff or vendors who are selling to them. They're like, I don't know if I should show that to the player, but it's the players. Show it to them. You know, get them to trust you, and then.
But you know, we all feel a certain way about athlete analytics and wearables on this panel, and I think we'll look back in 5 years at this conversation and be astounded that we just had this type of conversation, because in 5 years' time there'll be two kinds of teams. There'll be teams and players that embrace this technology and get the benefit out of it, and there'll be teams that lose. They'll be the two groups, because this is, I mean, that's the bottom line. This kind of stuff is proven to work. You've been able to quantify it. You've seen it in the lab setting. Teams are seeing it on the field, on the court. This is a proven technology. Okay, so prove it. So the number of injuries. I mean, you really want me to? Oh, this is a great question to ask me. So if we look at the, if we look at the Colts. In football, Indianapolis Colts, okay. And you look at you know, their injury reserve, and you look at the fact that they've just started using this technology. This season was year one, and it happened because I was sitting at this event next to Andrew Luck last year, and we had a long chat about the technology afterwards. Their injury reserve dropped from 15 to 3. If you hear what Jimbo Fisher says after FSU won the football championship year before last, he said, you know, our soft tissue injury during the year dropped something like 87% from the year before. And that's because of the deployment of this type of technology. And I think instinctively on this panel, we all know that this is the case. We are just trying to show everybody else that this is what the future holds. And I think it will become obvious and evident and widely used, and in every game, in every league, in every competition, by every team just about, sometime in the next 5 years. That's my view of it. So John, your injuries next year on the set are just going to go plummeting. So good news for you. Yeah, because you started using the S5s.
Right. You know, one thing on, I really do like to look at it as this, you know, digital and natural selections and things are going to fall off. A company like Catapult is doing awesome stuff because they are streamlining a really important data set to sports. The question is are teams going to be able to put it in the right context and use it in the correct way? I love to point to the example. If I own an NFL team right now, if I am the GM or if I'm the owner and I'm making giant decisions on who's my running back. If I were to say, I sit back and I say, go get me a guy who's in the middle of the speed metric. I don't want it, if that guy's at the top, I don't want him. Go get me a guy who's in the middle. Get me a guy who's in the middle of the size metric. I don't want a big guy at all. I don't want a giant guy. F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. Big mass, big acceleration, big force, they're not going to survive. And it's proven over and over and over and over and over. When you say something like that, for whatever reason, people are attracted to that shiny thing. They're like, oh my God, that guy's off the charts in speed. Speed is good. You can't teach speed, therefore that's my security blanket. I'm saying, but speed means a giant force, and what's that frame, and is it going to be able to absorb the force? They're going to get hurt, so get the middle. That idea that the middle of the curve, depending on the metric that you're looking at, could be a great spot, depending on the position that you're looking at. It just hasn't sunk into the mentality, I think, at the highest level yet.
We saw this year in the NBA, the number of 35-minute players in the NBA is at 17 this year. Only 17 players in the NBA have average 35 or more minutes. Last year was at 33. A few years ago it was 60. You're smiling over there, I can see. I think a couple of your players have over 35 minutes, and I think one thing we've talked about is, are we swinging too far in the other direction, that players are under-conditioned and all this biometrics is saying we need more rest, and then suddenly we're going too far on the other end of the spectrum?
You put me on the spot for like the biggest debated question in the NBA right now.
That's what I'm here for.
It's that's one of the big debates is, you know, minutes, and you know, we've talked about it as an organization, and we sit down and each guy and have a collaborative effort, you know, from the trainers, strength coaches, to the management, to the head coach, to see what we want for each guy. And I think that's an approach to take, because not every guy is the same. And I think as the biometrics and analytics are advancing, we'll get better at this, because just to blanket and say 35 minutes or 33 minutes, you can't do that with every player, because if you look at say you have a player A that played 35 minutes and ran in the game 3 miles, and then you had player B that played 35 minutes and ran 1 mile. I mean, that's a very simplified, so minutes aren't necessarily the greatest thing. It's a start, but I think if we evolve to that with, we have Sports View now that allows us to track the players and see what they're doing in that 35 minutes. I think that's much more beneficial. And if we ever got to the point where we could do real time during games to see what the guys are doing in the games, rather than just looking at minutes and saying, all right, this guy's player load was this, he's maxed out what he can, let's sit him. I think that is a more educated analytical approach to it rather than just using minutes. Now, obviously we have to use minutes because that's what we have right now, and I can see we're progressing to that point. But what these guys do during games is so much different based on position, type of offense you run, defense you run. So I think that's sort of where we're heading, and that's a great thing for our players. And the other thing is undertraining. So now, if you're sitting a guy, and this is what I was talking to Tom earlier, one of the things I see is we're actually maybe taking a step backwards and undertraining a lot of our players incorrectly, because if that guy, some of these guys are such unique specimens and athletically are so gifted, and if we're limiting him at a certain amount of minutes and not doing it off of what he's doing in the game, you're really holding him back. Now this guy is not able to get points, rebounds, whatever he would if he was playing more time, and his body's able to tolerate that. So I think this is a good thing for the players, that they're able to achieve their personal goals. Teams are able to achieve their team goals by keeping the player healthy, and rested for the playoffs. That's my 2 cents.
Like in terms of this debate, like this goes along with like the pitch count in MLB, and that, I honestly, I sit back and I go, God, what a narrow view. Like saying that guy can't throw any more than 110 pitches and that's his limit and that's it. This guy can't play any more than 33 minutes. Look, what you have to put it into a context of literally a life. How much mileage is on something? How is it prepared? We did this piece on Tommy John surgeries. Mm-hmm. There's this explosion in Tommy John surgeries. It's an epidemic that's going on in baseball. What's to explain it? There are a lot of different factors. Among them is that pitchers now are specializing so early in their careers. They're throwing all the time, all year round. You think back of guys that played 15, 20 years pitching baseball 30 years ago. They didn't play all year round as kids. That wasn't even an option. There weren't leagues to even do it. So they were playing multi-sports. They were changing it up. This idea that 2 minutes of game time somehow is jeopardizing a player. What about playing year round all the time leading up before that? That's much more dangerous than playing 2 minutes. It's just such a myopic view that that's what I worry about, is that people are taking this and saying this many pitches, this many minutes, but you got to have a world view of this whole thing, because it's not, you can't be myopic like that.
So when I hear minutes, and I know we talked about this earlier, Joe, and you're a very strong practitioner in this space, and we talked about minutes. To me, it's like saying, I'm going on a journey, how far is the drive between 2 cities? And my answer is 37 minutes. It is just not the right unit of measurement to be using. And game time in minutes, or in other sports you have pitches that you mentioned, it's the wrong unit of measurement to actually be using to understand how much time players should be playing for and how they should be playing.
Leslie, you're saying?
I just think that, look, we have the ability with data analytics to solve these problems, whatever they are. If they're number of games played, game minutes. If the league, as I believe the NBA league does, collects injury data, they collect performance data, they collect regular stats, put all that data in an equation, including minutes played per player, put it into an analytical equation. Look, we do weather, we tell people what to farm all over the world based on big data analytics, we do traffic, we can do this. It needs to be organized. It needs to be a hugely concerted effort in sports, and then figure out the answer as best you can. The data you get will still be more accurate than the judgment you're making anyway per individual team. The other thing that is important about that is when you do data analytics, you've got all this data. You have structured data, meaning you have data that's just on a spreadsheet. So-and-so got an Achilles, whatever it is. And then you have all this unstructured data like video and all. But we can put that all together, and it's being done all the time in other sectors, and get good answers, and that's kind of important. And people, let them interpret it differently. The Rockets may interpret it differently than the Celtics. That's okay.
Yeah.
I love looking at historical studies. Like we really look at, all right, this is we got an answer to a question that we posed, but are we even asking the right question? Let's look back historically at all this data. When you go back and you say, let's look at athletes that were truly excelled and are considered the best or considered, in that range of, wow, that athlete's really good. Let's now, without the data, go back and see what is their history, what did they have to do, so that as you're modeling how you're interpreting data as you're going along, you can get a better snapshot as to, oh, you know what, that's actually what these people were doing, but they didn't know it. They were multi-sport athletes growing up. They played, different sports all year round. They didn't specialize in an early age. Their minutes per game, they played X number of minutes, but they weren't concerned with that. So that now when I get a number, it's not an instant snap decision. It's more of that fits into the historical context, of players that might be at risk for injury or players that actually did excel. So it's very important that we're getting this data and putting it into a historical context, I think.
Now, the one thing I have to say in regards to all this, though, is we're on the right, we're talking about the right thing, the right direction, but we're not there yet. So, I've been looking at the data on, the guys in games, and, it's changed every month. Like, I think I haven't figured it out, and it changes again. So, right now we have to deal with what we have. This is the right direction, but we're not there yet. And that's why, I think we're here, and a lot of these companies are really looking at that. I don't think there's a set model in place yet for that. We're working towards that. We're on the right path, but as of right now, this is sort of what we're dealt with, or that we have in hand.
Joe, this is a two-part question, and I'm putting you on the spot again. I think everyone wants to know, when's Dwight coming back?
Talk to Daryl.
But secondly, on that, how has your job changed? You've been in the league for 9 years. Yep. Diagnosing what was wrong with Dwight, getting him back to playing shape. How much information has changed since you got into the league versus now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's changed tremendously. It's become, they say old school, new school. It's become a lot more new school. But things that have left are now coming back again. So it's interesting. Things are in cycles. We've become a lot more inundated with analytics and numbers, and sometimes for good and bad. I've seen where teams have killed themselves, in my side, in the performance side, with doing too much analytics and losing sight of the real goal. The real goal is winning games and getting these guys to perform. So I think that's
what happened there? So. They use
just,
too much analytics.
Sometimes I just think sometimes teams lose focus and they get all bogged down in numbers, and then they're forgetting all right, what's real important. Talent, developing this talent, getting them stronger to play. And I think sometimes if you don't keep that core concept as your primary goal, you could do all this other stuff, your team's not going to be successful. And if you look, a lot of teams that are successful in the playoffs and that win championships, they keep those core values all the way throughout. They work hard in the weight room, they work hard on the court, the physical, they do a lot of injury prevention, and they keep that concept. They're adding analytics to it, which is great, that's just boosting them up more, but they don't make that side, they have a happy medium between the two sides, which I think is crucial. As soon as you start going too much to one side or the other, that's where I think you falter a little bit.
Leslie, can you use their competitive nature, athletes, with biometrics to kind of motivate them to embrace this?
I think absolutely, particularly if you share the data with them and then they're seeing it and they're beating themselves or they're beating somebody else. But the data has to be accurate. At the center, and I applaud every company in this because it's incredibly hard work, and to go into a team and try to implement it, it scales. But our favorite expression is none of this SH stuff works, because it doesn't work all the time. So is this guy's heart rate 220, and he's at where you want him to be and he wants to be, or did he sweat it off? And so unless you can discover an EKG with that or something else to validate it, and you're making, you're going to be making very big decisions on this. This guy had an abnormal medical exam, and now we're seeing this in performance, or he has an arrhythmia. Can he continue to play? It's a tragic thing not to let somebody play. So you really need good data. That's why I always gravitate toward the implantables, because they tend to be highly accurate. They can measure, the everything, and when you're making these key decisions, who to play, and you're going to try to get credibility with a coaching staff and training staff who already knows what they're doing, has created champions. How do you add value? It's got to be accurate data, number one. So it's early days for sure.
Joe, did you say that you, like JJ Redick, or you would use him as an example of this guy who just works a ton and you just wouldn't know it by conventional measures and your athletes?
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the things, that I've, over the course of my 10 years, and I wouldn't expect, my first couple of years I was new, green, I didn't know as much as obviously I do now, and one of the things I picked up on is, your best shooters are diligent in the weight room as far as lower body. And a lot of people wouldn't expect that. That your top shooters, they think they're worried about their shot, messing up their shots, but I found the complete opposite. And that's a great selling point to my young guys that are coming to the league. And not only are they, getting their legs strong for their shot, and I mean that's how you sell them, but you're also keeping them healthy because now they're stronger. And if you're stronger, you get hurt less than a weaker guy. But yeah, over the course of my 10 years, my best guys in the weight room that were like crushing their legs, day in day out, were also happen to be my best shooters.
And I hate to bring it back to James Harden and Dwight, but last year I think he had something like 30 miles less traveled on the court than Chandler Parsons, and they played the same number of minutes.
Mm-hmm. And I mean,
that's information, but how can you use this information with James Harden to? I don't know if it's effort, but he's going from top of the key to top of the key. It's different.
That's where we got to be careful with numbers and how we look at some of the numbers and how we compare it to other players and other teams, because some guys play different positions. Some guys have a different style of game. So if you're to compare James, that's more of an ISO player, to a guy that's running off screens all day like JJ Redick, you're comparing apples and oranges. So that's where you got to really be careful, and that's why I think one of the good things we do at the Rockets is Daryl will get information, I'll get information, I'll go to the coaches, and we'll all collaborate and say, hey, what do you think? And then a coach will say, oh no, this is why, because he runs it, we're running this type of set formation and so forth. So I think that's where analytics could be dangerous if you take it for what it is, because there's sometimes it's like solving a puzzle. Sometimes if a guy has a bad game, if you just look at his catapult numbers, that's one piece of it, and you say, oh look, he slowed down, he must be overtraining or something like. Well, no, in actuality, he got in a fight with his girlfriend the night before. He was out to 4 a.m. So you got to really, it's one piece of the puzzle. You got to look at all the different variables that affect these guys. There's like 20 different variables. So if you just look at one or two and just say, hey, this is a number that says he's not performing, all right, that's one piece. You got to look at everything else and try to figure out why.
Would that be a motivating thing for if you showed him that Steph Curry ran
20? And yeah, don't get me wrong. I show my guys that as motivation because you're always trying to get them to perform better. But you also have to, be reasonable, and the players understand too. And I'll even say to some of my guys, like, listen, I know we were doing this game, and that's why, but it doesn't mean we don't strive to get to this point or so forth.
So that's a pretty good example when people say to me, do you think you'll reach a point where the system is totally automated and there's going to be no need for involvement of trainers, etc. Will it just spit out the answers from sports science of what players can do? I think the points that Joe has just made are a great illustration of the centrality of good quality trainers, coaches, etc., in managing the players, in interpreting the information that is coming out of all of these technologies. I mean, I think that's one of the central things that makes this effective, is the quality of operator that you've got using it.
Two things I think are really important in terms of even looking at data, like we were just talking about, of why was somebody's performance down. If you were to take all the metrics and say, what is someone's reaction time, what is someone's power output, all those metrics, on top of those metrics is how much sleep did they get in the days leading up to that performance, because that determines everything. The sleep studies are insane. When you look at sleep deprivation is the cause of so many auto accidents, bad decisions that are made, poor effort on sleep by itself is almost like the master of all the other analytics underneath it. But we don't really study sleep like that, nearly to the extent.
And on top of that, I mean, if you look at the NBA, that's our biggest issue. With the guys traveling all the time, 4 games in 5 nights, flying all over. Personally, I wouldn't say it's so much game fatigue and that they're running so much and they're doing. I would say it's more adrenal fatigue and them, not getting rest and allowing their bodies to recharge. I would say that's our biggest issue with having these guys, being able to perform at a high level and recharge and be injury free. And until we figure that out, that's
adrenal is
like a hormone, allowing their hormones to recharge, a growth hormone. Naturally, so that they're back up to, feeling 100%, testosterone levels are back up to normal. When that gets depleted, that's when bad stuff happens.
I love the argument of fans always say, in going into the PED realm where fans are like, I want my guys at that starting line for everything to be equal. That's the spirit of the game. That doesn't exist. So if you have a starting line, that guy didn't sleep and that guy did, it's already a disadvantage. There's already, that guy ate cotton candy and that guy ate chia seeds. It's already different. There is no equal at a starting line. And in terms of equal on the metrics, it all has to be put into that right context. Having a great general manager, great trainers that can humanize this thing. When you look at, if you were even to look at, just pick your championship team and say, all right, are those guys off the charts on every metric across the board? Or is there this chemistry and harmony within a locker room, and positive energy begets positive energy, and there is no metric for guys liking each other and guys playing hard, and there's no that intangible is the most important thing. All this other stuff underneath it is great information if used in the right context, but you'll never be able to replace the energy that's created within an organism, and you don't want to replace it.
So I'd extend that to the whole organisation. So there is no doubt that what we see is that the teams that we work with most closely and that are most embracing of this do not start and finish with Catapult. They have got a whole variety of different technologies. They just have a culture of innovation. I mean, sorry, Joe, but like the Spurs are one of those kind of guys as well. I mean, the Spurs have just got this culture of innovation that exists there. I have to say the Mavs are one of them as well, because Cuban's involved with the business, so the Mavs are one of them as well. They've got this culture of innovation across the organisation where they will try different things and they'll be willing to try and maximise the performance of the team, not just looking unidimensionally at one element of it.
One team that doesn't have it is Miami Heat. They would just won 2 championships.
So, there's other elements that play a factor as
LeBron
well.
James, maybe.
There's other facters, yes. Players also play quite a big role in the skill level of players.
I mean, a lot of it's all federated now, right? You hear there are different vendors selling different solutions. There's different data. Teams do different things. At some point, there's going to have to be a central aggregator, right? And then that feeds data to players or there has to be some standardization so you can start to look at the whole picture and really say, this is how you prevent injury in the NBA at this level of athlete. Because if you don't have all that stuff, each team is going to, I was talking to a really smart guy just with stats, a friend of mine, Paul Robinson, saying, well, look, you've got these cameras and you're giving the Celtics the same information you're giving, whoever, the Knicks. And he said, yeah, but they all interpret it differently. Mm-hmm. So it's really not the same data. They all extract different value. But until it's in one place and you can really have the team metrics and then you've got the league metrics, you divide it by player, you can judge strength and conditioning coaches and you can judge coaches on the basis of injury as well. You can put a lot of factors into the equation, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe some people don't do it as well as they could.
One thing that makes me nervous, when we talk about athletes as machines, like the coded language there is that they're not human beings, they're machines. We look at a dashboard in our car, but these are real human beings. Should we be referring to them as commodities like that?
No. We should encourage them and include them right away. They're the very most important thing, and it's their body, and they should get the data. They should have a seat at the table on the governance of it, and they'll play harder, I think, and do better because they know. I think we have to talk about them like they're the most important piece. The same way, look, it's happened in medicine. Patients now get all their data because guess what? They deserve it. It's them. They need to realize their own outcomes. I think players are exactly the same way.
I mean, I think the best teams, I think the best teams in all the leagues do a really great job of humanizing players, right? Of not saying that this is just a number on a spreadsheet, and they're an object. They're a real person, because I think that chemistry aspect, the best teams keep around those players that are great positive energy that people can rally around. And the teams that really flounder are those that get attracted to the shiny object, and even if that person's a problem in the locker room, they keep them around, they overpay them, they destroy the team chemistry. I think that the good teams humanize the whole thing and aren't looking at them as just a number on a spreadsheet.
But also let me say, when you hear people talk about dashboards, for example, I wouldn't necessarily interpret that as people thinking of humans as machines. One of the challenges in this space is there is a huge amount of data that is being, our technology generates 1,000 data points a second per player when they're practicing. That's a lot of data. And you analyse that data, you bring it together, and what you're trying to do is make useful sense out of that data. And one of the things you need to do if that's going to be successful is to bring it down to a more basic and understandable level. And terminology like dashboards and those types of simplifications and analogies are all part of trying to make this easier to consume for trainers and for coaches and for players, so they understand exactly the way in which this fits into their broader playing careers.
one thing is, how do we make sports science cool for fans? You do, your job is to do this, but like media, fans watching at home, like this is all, it seems like we've covered this just from the team side, but why should fans care about sports science?
Hopefully we do a good job of entertaining people. So watch sports science, it's fun.
Well, I mean, it could change betting lines, but absent, you know, but absent sports gambling, I think, we tested a bunch of women where they were just watching football games, you know, women, and we said, like, what do you really want? And they were watching some of the data, and a bunch of the women said, well, what we really want is a workout that Clay Matthews runs. And I thought, what a different income stream. You know, they're watching Clay Matthews, and they want to do like a work. So you can imagine we want to match our biometrics with Clay Matthews. Okay, that's interesting. Who knew that? So there's all this, I think, these other streams of money, and even after players quit playing, you know, to be able to continue to kind of monetize your biometrics.
It's funny, if you're playing NBA 2K or NBA Live, you'd always have like a turbo meter of when these guys are burning out of energy. Like, are we going to come to a point where if you're watching a game, you can see that LeBron James or Andrew Luck is just wearing down, and you can see that on a graph?
So I think, I think the fan experience as well is going to be totally transformed in 3 to 5 years. And
why is that?
And so there'll be two kinds of things that you'll see. One is, you use the NBA, so the computer game analogy. So we've all played too many of those. So today, when you look at the graphics that our clients see, that the teams see, one of the things they can see in real time is little trails on the back of players that fade, that will show the routes, for example, that those players are running, and that is really useful tactically for those teams. But for fans, that's pretty cool as well. Yeah. But I think what is going to happen from all of this type of technology for the fan is that you'll start understanding the game in ways that you don't understand it today. And one of the analogies or examples I use is that, again, it's a football analogy, but when you think about a defensive line in football, they're kind of underrated a little bit in terms of the impact they're having or understanding what they're doing in the game. And, there's a sack of a quarterback that's fantastic. But imagine if you could understand, for example, when some linesman was exerting twice the amount of force in that particular play as is generally exerted in most plays. And you start looking at what he was doing in that play and what impact he was having, and an offensive line, how he was protecting the quarterback in that particular situation. I think the most exciting thing about sports science to the viewer is making the game, understanding aspects of the game that perhaps are not being seen at the moment, to bring more novice fans into the game because they understand it better, like what the yellow first down line did, and also to take experts, and a lot of us here are expert fans, and to add new degrees of sophistication to what they can take from the game. I think that is the real opportunity for this with a viewer. It's much more than just dots moving around on a field. It is a deeper understanding and an appreciation of the subtleties that are occurring in the game.
We really try very hard to not only educate, but entertain, and to put science in a perspective that's using great analogies so you can understand it and really giving you a much deeper understanding. I think sports right now, in terms of the fan experience, think about the fan experience at home. It rocks. I mean, watching sports on TV now is amazing. The stuff that you get, it's so amazing, so much better than it used to be, that sports and live sports is really kind of in the position that the cinemas were in, right? You had home video and all this stuff and all these other ways of consuming the same product. So going to a theaters now have to have, full restaurants built into them and leather reclining chairs. You got to have stuff. And I think sports science to the fan at home is going to be one of those things that, it's going to be added on within the game experience and at home. But again, it's going to be the stuff that people care about. And we're not at the point where we can say what people really care about.
The biggest limit to the biometric data that you were talking about, so when Andrew Luck is getting tired, is that it is hard to imagine Andrew Luck or his various representatives being super enthusiastic about that information appearing on screen, because I'd love to see it and you'd love to see it, and so would the opposing team in real time. So would, they'd love to relay that to the defensive linesman. So, I think that is one of the challenges, that there is stuff that I could show you today on screen that you would love, and it would make me extremely unpopular and scared to walk down dark alleys.
That brings us to our questions segment here, and actually this question is right related to that. On a side note, how cool would it be if if someone was sprinting down the floor and flames came out of him on TV? Like that's what we were. That's like what the trails are, right?
Correct. Yeah, we don't do flames, but you know, if you want flames, we can do flames.
Let's make it happen. All right, ESPN, are you listening? Okay. All right, so 12 votes for this one. Upvoted 12 times off of what you just said, Adir.
I got upvoted 12 times?
No,
That's like my best ever score at anything.
No, this is off of what you were just talking about. How do you think NBA Players Association, NFL Players Union, NHLPA, et cetera, should handle player biometric data policy? Do you believe they should be doing a better job getting in front of this movement?
So I think you shouldn't underestimate how sophisticated they are in their knowledge today. You know, just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just happening behind closed doors. And the number one guiding light for all of these players' associations correctly seems to be, how can we make the game safer for players? Because the leagues are concerned about player safety as well, and they're also concerned about the commercials. And what the leagues and the Players Association are coming to realise jointly is that the best thing you can do is make players healthy and play more, because that's better for the players, and also it's the number one revenue predictor for the leagues. The more times the best players are playing, the greater the viewership, the greater the broadcast rights. So I think, you know, the Players Association is sophisticated in this regard. They are at the forefront of this, and they are worried about exactly what they should be worried about, which is how can this kind of in-game wearable help player health and safety.
So that's your pitch to Michelle Roberts, is this will extend the careers of your clients.
I don't think I need to pitch to her. I mean, I think they have a high degree of sophistication, like they understand these things. I think I would just be reiterating thoughts that she already has. You know, negotiations between players' associations and leagues are great dramas to watch, right? I mean, you've got fantastic personalities, you know, they play out in a particular type of way. They should sell tickets to it, right? But fundamentally, on both sides, there's a high degree of sophistication, and there is not much that I could teach either side. We just try to facilitate happy conversations.
Okay, how, if at all, can biometrics help prevent more sudden / unpredictable injuries, for example, concussions?
We have looked at more concussion studies and done enough concussion studies that I can say two things. Like, if we're looking at football and we're only talking about football, like somehow football gets scapegoated for the concussion thing and everyone's concerned about that. I mean, X Games is super dangerous. Falling on a skateboard is really dangerous and the concussion rate is super high. Hockey, it's super high. Rugby, it's super high. Like like we don't want to just talk about football, but what I will say is in terms of creating technology that will minimize the concussion issue, the force numbers are so big, people don't understand how far beyond the threshold we have gone in terms of amount of force that a head is experiencing to reduce a concussion, that we as a society have said it kind of is what it is in terms of those numbers. Now, in terms of someone gets a concussion, you keep them off the field for 90 days or 6 months or whatever, that's stuff that you can do. But barring changing the rules of the game, the force is exactly what the force is. It kind of is what it is on that.
So why do you say barring changing the rules of the game? Because actually I think that's interesting. In markets overseas, where we've been deployed in-game, what we've found is the best way to reduce injury in-game is to identify the scenarios in which those injuries are most likely to occur and to try and make slight tweaks to minimise the frequency of those scenarios rather than to put better helmets on or whatever else it might be.
Right, and like the NFL trying to move the where the ball is kicked off and trying to reduce the number, because that's the highest percentage play. That is true. At its core, it's tackle football and big objects colliding. That's just it just kind of is what it is. But unless you change the rules of something, that's a great example. Change the rules and you can minimize it. But
tweak the rules,
tweak.
Leslie, how do you see blood data being utilized as part of the athlete management and conditioning over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's getting better, and blood data is great. You'll have point of service blood data, and it can be glucose and other things can be very helpful. There are many storied examples of Olympic teams and others using that. It's just cumbersome. I think if you can get enough of the other data, say players are already wearing a sensor, if you get enough, you can probably predict the blood values because it'll be good enough. But I think it's important to an extent. A lot of the strategies are going to be determined by who the coach wants to play anyway. And I think the data game is a lot about minimizing risk, where you can intervene. In the USC soccer team, we realized that, the coach was he couldn't figure out why the girls weren't winning. They'd been national champions. They wore sensors. Suddenly he realized the day before the game he was running them 6 miles. So he said, oh, they're not lazy, you know, they're not diverted by school. That was the aha moment that was kind of good. So in doing that, they won more games, but in addition to that, they had less injuries. So fatigue, in that sense, we learned was clearly a factor in both injury and win-loss. So where you can mitigate, it also helps in team dynamics. He was able to use it to show some players why they weren't playing, who thought they should play, because they weren't working as hard or whatever.
I think, to piggyback off that, I think blood data and endocrinology, that might actually be the next frontier that we address, because there's so much valuable data that, me personally, in my environment, I could get from that information. So it's just implementing it, and all of the rules and regulations, it makes it difficult to do. But there is significant value, I think, if we do a lot of the stuff to measure the players, the outside of their body. If we could look inside their body and see what's going on there too, I think that data is crucial to tell the whole story.
Excuse me, what's on the testosterone, for instance, like, it's also really scary because we've never done it before. So there are a lot of elite women athletes right now at the international level who they have high testosterone levels and they're excluded from sports. No one's ever seen continuous test on women this big. Women are bigger now and whatever. So that feels to me a little rough. You're collecting it, it's high, but you don't know what it means. You can't contextualize it. That's not a man, that's still a woman, but she can't compete as a woman. I mean, so I think you have to be, when you start really getting it, and it turns out to be not what you thought, pretty careful.
This is a good one. What is on the frontier of brain training for athletes? How can they integrate analytics into real-time, in-game decision-making for brains? Anyone?
What's interesting about brain training, people talk about two aspects of that. One is muscle memory, right? First of all, there is no such thing as muscle memory. The muscles don't have memory. It's the nerve pathways that actually have memory. So that's where repetition of something is actually allowing you to do it more efficiently and better and without thinking. Best analogy is a musician, right? It's not people refer to it as muscle memory, but it's not actually the muscle memory. But in terms of the brain training and knowledge, there's going to be a larger subset of training that's out there that can help you decide what I'm going to do. The question is how do you implement that in a game, and are you able to do it? One of the metrics that I think is very difficult to test ahead of time, we were talking about this before, is just how you make decisions under pressure. We test a lot of guys from the special forces and put them under duress and have them make decisions. And the characteristic of somebody in the Navy SEALs or other special forces divisions, the common trait is that they're super calm. They don't change. That aspect really is the key to being able to perform under pressure, is that your vitals aren't going off the charts and flooding your body with adrenaline so that you make rash decisions. You're staying calm. And that ability is very hard to test ahead of time because you don't know how someone's going to react when the lights are on and it's a championship game.
You told me this story backstage, but I don't believe it. The Navy SEAL who was dunked into water?
Yeah, we had Stu Smith. We had a guy named Stu Smith. Before Fight Science was a program called, before Sports Science was a program called Fight Science, and we had a guy named Stu Smith. He was a former Navy SEAL, and we were just trying to say, how long does it take to make a Navy SEAL go hypothermic? So we had him ingest the thermometer. We'd throw him into a big tank of ice water. This clip's been all over the place. Throw him in a tank of ice water, and the average person, when thrown into ice water, will go hypothermic in like 8 minutes. 20 minutes is considered elite. We're standing around over an hour. He's in ice water, and we had to just call it a day because we had to go. We're like, I don't know what to tell you. You're not hypothermic yet. And the key on this, people are like, he's a superhuman freak. He's unbelievable. He's really a mental freak because he didn't freak out. We're like, are you cold? He's like, yeah, kind of cold. Like, you're not shivering. You're not like doing. He's like, yeah, because if I shiver and move, I'm using all my energy. So if I just sit here and stay really calm and just really minimizing that energy, I can sit here for a really long time. We're like, well, you told us that now. I mean, we've been here forever. I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's that mental aspect.
We have quite a few clients that are special forces teams, and there's an amazing similarity between special forces guys and elite athletes. A very, very strong correlation.
We tested Travis Pastrana when he was setting his world record jump a few years back in Long Beach. We centered him up, had all his vitals from the time that he left the tent to go out to actually perform to the time that he landed. His heart rate didn't change. I'm like, you weren't excited, like setting this world record? It's just like super even keeled. Now afterwards, you can celebrate and do all that, but that's the sign of an amazing athlete. Someone that, and when Michael Jordan and elite athletes talk about the game is just moving really slow, they do have more time to process because they're calm and they're taking in information and deciding what to do. They're not, the flood of adrenaline makes you decide like this, and the game is too fast then.
Leslie, what would we learn if we had a pulse of every athlete in a game?
Yeah, I mean, a good example of this, I think, where if you look under the hood, sometimes you're surprised. You think a guy's pretty Mr. Cool and he's kind of amped, but that's fascinating on its own. But say golf, where all the action happens for the pros on the putting green, and they have these really high heart rates because it's money and it's their career, and you can modulate your heart rate, which is pretty simple stuff. So just being able to put them in the place where they can focus enough to make the putt and bring their heart rates down and get not too relaxed, but not so excited. So that information can be really valuable. Again, it's bringing it right back to the athlete, though.
So like heart rate, we're never going to be able to see that because the unions wouldn't allow that, right?
I mean, again, this stuff's disruptive. So
because right now, if it's 51% of the BRI they get, it's going to be 100% for them to allow the heart rate stuff.
Well,
right?
like in golf, if or whatever it was, if you thought your player would perform better, I think it would be pretty widely adopted if it were really effective, right? I mean, how many people are not going to adopt a solution if you can show that it has that kind of value? I don't know.
So they already see it, at the individual level, they already see it today. I agree with you. Like, if you want to negotiate that deal, I'm happy to follow behind and we can stick it on the screen, but I think it's a tough deal to negotiate.
Yeah. We have just about a little over a minute left. Let's see here. This says top 3 things you want to see come out of biometrics in sports in 2015, but we can just go on and down and wrap up with that. Is what are you looking forward to most out of biometrics in 2015 or beyond? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think what already exists is so broad and so underutilised that the trick is not adding more stuff. It is just to have increased adoption and increased utilisation of what is already out there and available in the marketplace. That's my view on it.
Yeah, we're always excited about putting things in a better context and constantly refining the context of what the data actually means. So I totally agree that the data is now out there and it's always out there. Now, I just think the context is what's going to continue to be refined.
I would say, more integration, injury prevention, performance enhancement. Marshall Falk said today, I couldn't believe this. He said, my best plays were in practice. If I could have been rested a little more, they would have been on the field. And I thought, maybe some more of that, where we're seeing some, we're really getting the best out of even the best athletes on the field.
NBA teams don't practice anymore, unfortunately.
No, we do a little. To go off what they said, so we don't spread ourselves too thin. There is so much data out there right now. There becomes a point of you have too much data. We got a lot of systems in place right now that's given us valuable numbers and analytics. All right, now taking those numbers and making sense of them before we start delving into all these other avenues and running us in all these different directions and not getting one thing done correctly. I think that's very important. Getting it right the first time with one thing, then just doing 90 different things, I think is very important and staying focused.
All right, I think that's it. All right, thank you so much for joining us. Round of applause for everyone.